Let's have a look at deer pose, or another variation of that, which is sleeping swan. Now, a lot of students are more familiar with this as a half pigeon. It's very important. There are some subtle differences here that means that you can let go of a lot of that alignment cueing of your vinyasa practice. So let's start off first with the deer pose. Now, the positioning of the legs can be quite unique. Now, one thing I want to address more than anything is that what you may notice with some instructing of deer, which I don't really understand particularly the alignment cueing of it. I can imagine if some students are very, very tight, that's what they would have to do. But for the majority of the students, they're not going to get a whole lot of benefit. And when you understand mechanically what's happening in the body, you realize it's not quite a krama, like it's not quite another variation. It's changing the pose quite a bit when we come into it in a slightly different way. So what you may have seen before is bringing the knee out in front of you and just lying forward over that or over the bolster. Now, for some students that are particularly tight, they're going to get a lot of benefit here, but there's going to be about 50% of the class that are getting very little benefit in this. And the reason why is because if I hold this position exactly and bring it up, you can see all that's really happening is I'm just turning my body a little bit and drawing my knee up. So for some people, they're going to get a little bit of benefit from that, but just drawing the knee up into the chest is not externally rotating the thigh. So to externally rotate our thigh, we have to do that. And that's how we really target the glute max. Realistically, we have to flex at the hip, and then we have to externally rotate the right femur bone. And that helps us to really target that thigh. So for those that are tight, yes, that is a good variation. But for a lot of people, you could probably talk them into a little bit of a stronger variation. Now, become aware that deer is not the easy version of sleeping swan, which is quite often understood like that. So, if you offer it to the students, it's like, you take deer or sleeping swan, and students from vinyasa are like, oh, I want sleeping swan. That's the strong one. I want to go to that one. But the reality is it just is different bodies will be better at different variations. So for bodies that are struggling maybe with a little bit of internal rotation, and so if they can't, and you may not be able to notice here on me, but look on yourself. If you have that right shin out in front of you like so, and then you draw that left knee all the way up into the sole of the right foot, you'll notice that your left femur bone, thigh bone, is just slightly internally rotating. And that's lifting some of your hips up. If you've got a lot of internal rotation in your hip, your left hip will be firmly onto the ground. It'll be very, very comfortable. And this is a pose that'll be super comfortable for you. And so you'll really enjoy coming into this. But other people that have limited internal rotation, which there are going to be quite a few, will really struggle coming forward in deer. They'll sort of come forward and they'll kind of just get a little bit locked and they won't be able to go a little bit further. Now, they would be the people that would be perfectly suited coming into more of a sleeping swan variation, which is extending that left leg back behind you. So if you don't really practice deer, it's not the easy variation. I'm sure you can get just as a strong sensation in that outer right hip. So I would implore you to give it a couple of goes in your practice to see how it feels in your body. But as we're setting this up, we got that right shin out in front of you, and then you probably want to take your right knee a little bit wider than your hip out to the side. And if that means bringing your heel in closer to your body, then please do so. By bringing your heel in closer to the body, you're reducing the amount of external rotation in your femur bone, which is one of the things that we need to happen. By bringing the ankle further away and taking the knee a little bit wider, we're going to increase the external rotation in the femur bone, so that makes it stronger. And so once you've found your variation of where you're going to place your ankle, then that's going to be pretty much it. Ideally, in the final pose, when we've come forward, we've got the 3 points of contact of the ankle, the knee, and the hip all pressing down into the ground. And if not, propping. So blocks underneath that right buttock, and it means when you can come forward that you can actually support those 3 points of contact. The reason why we don't want to do that is because if we've come forward and we've done what we've been told in vinyasa, and we've stabilized the knee and stabilized the ankle, but our hip is now bouncing up and down, what's actually happening is we're doing this. So our femur bone is where it is, and our shin is now moving, which means we're trying to get lateral movement in our knee. Now, our knee can't really do that so much because we're trying to get more external rotation, but it's going to put a big force onto the medial meniscus here on the inside edge of this knee, which is not going to be good for you. So 3 points of contact. If you're doing vinyasa, that you're there for 30 seconds a minute, no big deal. But in yin, just because we're spending so much more time there, we don't want to be starting to pinching and compressing meniscus for long periods of time. So 3 points of contact: ankle, knee, and bum down onto the ground. Can't get the bum down, place the block underneath your bum, and that brings the ground closer to you. If you're trying to make sure you get that shin parallel, give it up. It's really not that important. Bring your ankle closer until you can get the ankle, knee, and buttocks down. Now that knee is secured, you can't get any lateral movement in the knee whatsoever, and therefore you're gonna avoid one of those major compression points, something we should be more mindful of in our practice. And then bolster out in front of you, and you're going to place it more over your shin. So now, because the alignment of my shin, which is now coming sideways a little bit more, so it's not pointing, it's not like square with the front of the mat, it's pointing out to the side a little bit. Then I'm going to point the bolster out to the side a little bit. Then I'm going to make my way forward over the bolster to come forward. Now, some students, again, they won't have the range, so they'll come back to that original variation of deer pose, and that's fine. They can do that. But you've set them up in a position that means over time, they can start to enable themselves to come forward into a variation, which is going to be moving them forward in their practice over time, which is going to be this shape. So bolster, belly over the bolster over the shin, and then go forward on that angle, which is perpendicular to your shin, basically. So perpendicular to your shin, think about that. And you can see here I'm more in sleeping swan pose because I've taken my knee quite a ways back. And that is because I have a lot of internal rotation in my hip. So if I keep my knee up in here and come forward, I get a really strong compression point in here, which is very uncomfortable in my body. It's just the way my skeleton is made. So when, like I said, coming into that deer variation, you keep the knee up a little bit more, come forward. And then if you want to take this into a sleeping swan, allowing that left knee to start to go back, and maybe you'll have the leg back. You don't necessarily have to get the leg straight and pointing straight back. You can have it just relax a little bit out to the side, and that's also okay as well. And then just folding forward over your bolster. As long as you feel this in your target area somehow, you're doing the pose, which is going to be your glute max in your buttocks, and there's going to be a nice big juicy sensation across your bum. And if you're doing that, perfect. Some students might get sensation on the inner thigh, and that's just because the pubic bone is moving back, which is one of the attachment points of your adductor magnus. So you might just start to get that a little bit going on there. Your sit bones are going back, which is going to be an attachment point for one of your hamstrings. You might get a little bit into there as well, but it's more likely going to be your adductor because your femur bone is stuck where it is, and then your pubic bone's going back. So you're going to get into this inner thigh. That's fine. That just means that's where you're tight. So this is a gallbladder position. I feel some sensation come up over the back more laterally. And then maybe if you feel it all over the back as you fold forward, it could be the bladder, but that's going to be a very secondary variation as it comes up the erector spinae over the back of the neck, back of the head, top of the head, and then into the forehead. If you feel that, then that's going to be your bladder pathway. And that's your sleeping swan and your deer pose.